and welcome back to the Random Seeders channel, and this video is going to be about politics because I've just woken up. It's the morning after the night before, shall we say. I went to bed knowing or being fairly certain that there would be a Conservative majority, and that's been confirmed now that I've woken up. And I won't lie that I'm feeling very dejected. I grew up in what was supposed to be an apolitical family for reasons I won't go into on this channel. But my parents were supposed to be apolitical. But when I look back at the way they reacted to, for example, Tony Blair's 1997 landslide victory, they were convinced that, a terrible thing had just happened and that the communists were taking over. And so it's fairly certain to me now that, look, I grew up in a conservative leaning family, and it's only since kind of establishing my own political identity in recent years, for again reasons I won't go into, that I've come to learn that I'm far more left-leaning than my parents were. I wouldn't say that I am fully left-leaning. I'm probably more left of centre, because there are certain things about conservatism that appeal to me. I like the idea of entrepreneurship. I like the idea of people who set up their own businesses being able to be fully rewarded without restriction. So I suppose from that point of view, I am a capitalist, but I also have socialist leanings in that like most Brits, I'm very proud of the NHS, and the NHS is as much of a socialist project as you can think of, really. It's saying, right, well, irrespective of people's station, people's standing, people's class, everyone ought to be looked after, at least when it comes to their health. So let's all put our money in this big pot, and let's draw from that pot to create something whereby healthcare is free, free at the point of delivery or whatever, and that's socialism. So that's roughly where I stand politically. I'm sort of left of centre. During the run-up to the Brexit referendum in 2016, I was quite passionately in favour of the UK remaining in Europe for various reasons. I do remember the kind of tide of propaganda that the Leave campaign was spewing out starting to have a bit of an effect on me. They were very much all about, vote with your heart, not with your head. Forget what the experts are saying. Let's just take a leap of faith and all that sort of thing. A very emotional reasoning, which I think did sweep along a number of British people, and I could feel myself being pulled by all that. And I didn't end up voting in the end, albeit I'm obviously living in Croatia, so I have to jump through at least a few hoops to vote. It's not like I can just go to the nearest polling station. But I allowed myself to kind of, to a degree, be swept along. And when the referendum result was announced in 2016, I was utterly heartbroken. And because I seriously didn't expect my country to walk away from a project as meaningful as the EU, because I will always feel, no matter what its perceived flaws are, and I haven't really heard anyone lay out the flaws of the EU in a way that I found utterly compelling, but let's say, for the sake of argument, that the EU has flaws. Well, is there not a danger of holding the EU to a different set of standards than we're holding, for example, the UK government or any other government? Is it possible that you're zeroing in on flaws of an institution that you're biased against, and holding it to impossible standards. That's the first thing. The second thing is that since the EU was formed, it's brought countries together, and it's made it, well, it's given Europe the longest unbroken period of peace in its history. And I think as a project, the EU is worth investing in for that reason alone. And when it comes to quibbles over governance and lack of transparency and lack of democracy, those are issues that are better fixed when you're a member and when you have a say. So I believe in the EU as an idea, as a project, as a means of peace. And I was really hoping that the UK would pull itself from the brink of just shooting itself in the foot, really, by leaving the EU. And I do sympathise with those who say, well, look, Lloyd, you can't have a referendum and then not deliver on the result, because that's a failure of democracy. When people vote for something, their wishes should be respected. And I do get that. I do understand it. But here's my answer. Democracy only really works when options are on the table that are attainable. And I think that if the 3.5 years since the EU referendum has taught us anything, it's that the British people were missold something. They were led to believe that they could have a clean break from the EU with all of the benefits of that they were enjoying as members and none of the drawbacks of leaving. We've since learned that for many complicated reasons, most notably the border with Ireland, which I can remember Tony Blair warning about actually in the run-up to the election, to the referendum, sorry. For many complicated reasons, it's just impossible for Britain to separate itself from the EU without immense drawbacks. I was looking at some figures that had been released the other day. 1.8%, sorry, minus 1.8% GDP for if you just leave the EU and don't have any other agreements with any other countries. If you manage to make agreements with other countries, then it's minus 1.4% GDP that the economy would shrink. So, and that's with a deal. That's with a deal Brexit. So even if they come up with some solution for breaking from the EU, the economy still suffers, and it's unclear as to how the Irish border question would be resolved. So, look, I think that if you're going to put an impossible situation to the British electorate and manipulate them into voting for it, I don't think it's a failure of democracy if you then find out that you can't actually deliver it. Imagine if there were a referendum for every citizen of the UK to receive £1 million. And unsurprisingly, the people of the UK vote in a majority that, yes, we would all like each adult citizen to receive £1 million. Thank you. And if after many years they still don't have £1 million put into their bank accounts, they can't then jump up and down and say, oh, this is a failure of democracy. They were promised something that was unattainable. And that's how I feel about Brexit. And of course, now the electorate has voted for a Conservative government that's obviously bent on getting Brexit done. Will Brexit happen within the next 5 years? I'm sure possibly some form of Brexit will happen. It's also possible that we'll have another 5 years of gridlock, because I'm sure even within the Conservative Party there are still those who aren't willing to drive the country to total ruin in a no-deal Brexit, which seems to be an eventuality that Boris Johnson is at least open to. So those who are saying that this election result is, I think Boris Johnson called it a stonking mandate for Brexit, I don't quite see it that way. I think that the British people were put in a very unfair situation where it was a case of go with a Conservative government led by Boris Johnson that at least has a semblance of credibility, or go with a Labour government under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn, who can't manage properly issues with anti-Semitism in his party and has made sympathetic noises and sympathetic gestures towards terrorist groups in the past. If there's one thing that the British people cannot stand on the whole, it's racism and suggestions of, making nice noises towards terrorist groups. There's just no way that most British people will go along with that. And apparently that was the case on the doorstep. Labour candidates were just hearing, no way, Jeremy Corbyn. And I can understand it. I really can. And, I'm gutted that we don't have at least a coalition of Labour and Lib Dem, where maybe the Lib Dems could rein in some of the more extreme tendencies of Labour. But at the same time, even I had reservations of, well, if Jeremy Corbyn gets into number 10, how does he get out of number 10? Because usually, these things go in cycles, don't they? They're cyclical. You don't go 5 years Tory, 5 years Labour, 5 years Tory, 5 years Labour. Usually you go for 2 or 3 parliaments under one party governing. And clearly, the electorate didn't want someone like Jeremy Corbyn running the country for that kind of time period. And it's understandable. But this brings me to the main problem in politics, which is the illusion of choice. And I was watching the election coverage on Sky News. Love the fact that they had John Bercow, by the way. I'm really fond of John Bercow. I think he's a wonderful character. And probably, to a large extent, has played a part in forestalling Brexit to some degree, you could argue, much to the chagrin of many Leave campaigners. But one thing that's noticeable was in the Sky studio, probably in other studios as well, you had all these colours. It was like a rainbow of colours, and you had these banners with Jo Swinson's picture, obviously Jo Swinson defeated in her seat. You had Jo Swinson's picture for the Lib Dems, you had Jeremy Corbyn's picture for the Labour, you had obviously Boris Johnson, you had Nigel Farage, glad he didn't win a single seat. I'm sure we won't see the back of him though, because he's like a bad smell, he just sticks around. You had the SNP, you had the Greens, so all these different colours, almost like, oh, we need a green. Oh, well, there is at least a Green Party, so let's stick that there. And it gives you the illusion that there's actually a choice in this. And that's what I find most irritating about not just UK politics, but politics all over the world. It's the same thing in America. In America, you have the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. What if you don't like either presidential candidate? What then? And in the UK, you have the Conservative Party or you have the Labour Party. That's it. I actually voted Lib Dem in this election, hoping that there was a chance in hell that maybe, people would just be sick of the main two parties and not vote for them at all and just vote for the Lib Dems. Well, I was wrong. I wouldn't say I was wrong. I kind of knew that this would happen, but even so, I wanted to give it a chance of happening. The Lib Dems were trounced. How many seats did they get? Let me just check. I think last time I checked it, yeah, it's 11 seats they got. So the Lib Dems, 11 seats. Labour, 203 seats as of now. Conservatives, 364. And the only other option, other than Labour and Conservative, is if you live in Scotland, in which case you can vote for the SNP. And the SNP did well with 48 seats. That's it. I'm sorry, that is not a choice. Why can't there be more options than just a lying charlatan who will prorogue Parliament unlawfully to get his way, which is what Boris Johnson is, or a terrorist sympathising, arrogant individual like Jeremy Corbyn? Why can't there be more of a choice between those two? And that's the most frustrating thing. But even with all that aside, I had hoped that the UK would have just gone I hoped it had gone so far right that there would just be a little bit of a rebound back towards the left, so that even if things aren't ideal, even if we have to stomach someone like Jeremy Corbyn in number 10, at least there's a bit of balance. Nothing of the sort, and I am genuinely concerned about the rise of the, I'm going to call it the hard right. I'm concerned about that globally. I'm bracing myself for Trump to, number one, evade impeachment, and number two, get elected again. I honestly think that, I mean, for goodness sake, Americans, try and shift him if you can, but I worry that we're just at the beginning, or we're halfway through. We're nowhere near the end of this lurch towards the right that's happening globally. And I think that there are lots of reasons for this lurch to the right, which probably are worthy of another video. But speaking for myself, I'm concerned about my country. I'm worried that there will be very little left of the NHS in 5 years' time. I'm worried that, well, I'm not just worried, I'm almost convinced that Britain will crash out of Europe in the next 5 years and probably be far less prosperous as a result. But the one glimmer of hope for me is that I have Croatian citizenship pending. So I've filled in all my forms and I'm just waiting for the Croatian government to say, yes, you are now a citizen. So once that happens, it's at least for me, and I realise this isn't a solution for everyone, but at least for me, it's going to leave me thinking, well, I can decide which country of the two, Britain or Croatia, is least screwed up and just live there, you know. So that at least gives me a little bit of peace. But it's not a nice political picture, and more than anything, I'm very distressed and very annoyed and very frustrated that the electorate has so few options. And nothing really for a reasonable-minded liberal person to cling to in terms of options. So those are my thoughts on politics and all that. Probably I'll do other videos on this. I also want to do more videos on Star Trek and Star Wars and other things as well. I had another idea. Anyway, it's going to be random, which is how it should be on the Random Seeders channel. Thanks so much for putting up with my ramblings, and that's it.